is the first Wednesday of the month, today being June 5th, 2024. Welcome to the broadcast. My name is Alfonsoh, and this is the Morning Momentum, your daily dose of the top stories making the headlines. Let's take a look at the papers this morning, and we start with the Standard newspaper. The elephant in the room, poor performance in civil service to be sent packing. Now, fresh rules on running of state agencies provide for rewards and sanctions against board members, CEOs, and employees on performance, with bosses below percent packing in year one and employees after 3 years. The story is beefed up for you on page 4 of the Standard this morning. Also, Kenya gets 60 billion shillings South Korea funding. Now, in numbers, 63 billion shillings is the concessional development loan to Kenya by South Korea during the Korea-Africa Summit in Seoul. Also, 31 billion shillings is the amount that will go into the Kenya Digital Media City project to expand digital and other creative economic opportunities to the young people. That is a top story you want to catch up with also inside the Standard this morning. Also on page 13, MPs want review of new varsities funding formula. That is a top story making the headlines on the Standard. And on page 9, Kenya is mourning the radio presenter Njambi Koikai, who died yesterday after long illness. Our condolences go to the family and friends of Njambi. Let's take a look at other stories on the Standard this morning. Teenager in police attack lands in court. That's a top story making the headlines on page 3. Muguka ban, battle splits Ruto's cabinet. Now, the Muguka ban has exposed the wide divide in President Ruto's inner sanctum after two CSS sided with those advocating the ban of the scheduled crop. That's a top story on page 8 of the Standard this morning. The Standard Enterprise is also beefed up for you. You want to catch up with all those insights augmented for you on the Standard this Wednesday morning. Let's take a look at the Daily Nation front page. The anatomy of a sick nation. Now, some of the most affected are HIV drugs for children, antibiotics, and antidepressants. Crisis. The country's public hospitals are facing a severe shortage of essential medicines and vaccines, leaving critically ill patients without access to life-saving treatment. But Health Cabinet Secretary Susan Nahumicha insists the situation is under control. That is a top story beefed up for you on page 4 and page 5 of the Daily Nation this morning. On page 2, the varsity funding. State forced to withdraw admission letters. Now, MPs yesterday made higher education PS Beatrice Inyangala commit to withdraw admission letters of students expected to join university in August and September until the exact amount the learners are to pay in fees is established. Now, the higher education funding model, according to bands, band 1, the tuition scholarship is 70%, tuition loan 25%, and tuition household contribution at 5%. Band 2, 60%, tuition scholarship, tuition loan 30%, and tuition household contribution at 10%. We'll take a look at that on page 2. On page 10, Charlene steps on toes with shoe drive for schools. Two Kitui MPs criticize initiative by the president's daughter to get pupils from needy families with shoes. You want to catch up with that on page 10. Man accused of beating up officer charged with violent robbery. You want to catch up with more of those insights on page 3. And on the cover page this morning, reject tax bill. More than 500 groups and banks tell MPs. Also on page 3, tribute, gone, not forgotten. Ja Love as Njambi takes her final bow. Now, popular radio and television host Njambi Koikai, also known as Jambi or Fire Mama to her fans, has passed on aged 38. She underwent 21 surgeries to cure endometriosis over the years. That's a top story making the headlines on page 3. And once again, our condolences to friends and family of the late media personality. Let's take a look at page 2. PS to withdraw varsity admission letters. Now, due to costs, some learners choose the courses they can afford rather than those they qualified for. New higher education funding model blamed for contributing to many students not reporting to universities. Disparity number that didn't apply for funding is 9,726. That is the number of students who did not apply for loans and scholarships, according to University Funding Chief Geoffrey Monari. That story is beefed up for you on page 2 of the Daily Nation this morning. On page 3, gone, not forgotten. Endo warrior Njambi Koikai takes her final bow. She had thoracic endometriosis, a condition where tissue that lines the inside of the uterus grows outside of it. Yeah, that is a story making the headlines on page 3. There is a quote here. She once said, and I quote, "I am a miracle. I've been through ups and downs. The recovery has not been easy, but I'm nowhere near those dark days." That is in August last year. Now, she had been in and out of hospital locally and abroad since her diagnosis at 29 years. Let us take a look at page 4. Anatomy of a sick nation. Patients suffer amid drug vaccine shortage in hospitals. Now, Health CS Susan Nahumicha says the shortage has been resolved, with some of the drugs already in the country and others expected next week. But a spot check in hospitals reveals the contrary. HIV medication for children, painkillers, antidepressants, and antibiotics are some of the most affected. Now, that is a top story on page 4. The anatomy of a sick nation. You want to catch up with that on page 1, page 5 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's take a look at page 6. Push for prudent use of donor funds. Now, partners pump 2.6 trillion shillings in projects. Government forms joint task force to enhance accountability. Now, the government has formed a task force to streamline the use of funds from donors to enhance accountability. Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua has said the task force comprises government representatives and development partners. Mr. Gachagua made the announcement during a development partnership forum at his official residence in Karen. You want to catch up with more of that on page 6 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's move on swiftly and take a look at page 10. Charlene Ruto steps on toes with shoes drive for schools. Now, the president's daughter insists it is unacceptable for young children to walk to school without shoes. Lawmakers criticize shoes distributed in primary schools are oversized and of poor quality. Now, these are sentiments by Kitui East MP Nimrod Mbai, and I quote, "They have come up with a funny program of distributing oversized plastic shoes in our primary schools. Those shoes are of poor quality." That story is beefed up for you on page 10 of the Daily Nation this morning. Now, let's move on and take a look at page 13. I'm sorry. Suspect linked to Dutch tycoon's death says woman pleads for leniency over her children. Nekesa, a state witness, confesses she helped the widow. Now, "I am remorseful for my actions. I have learned my lesson. I pray for a lenient sentence." Those are sentiments by Nekesa. Now, these were the words of Mary Nekesa through her advocate 3 months after pleading guilty to participating in planning the murder of a Dutch tycoon Herman Ruwenhorst. Appearing before High Court Judge Anne Onginjo in Mombasa on Monday, Ms. Nekesa seemed subdued, her actions weighing heavily on her face. Her confession on the role she played in the grand murder scheme has bolstered the prosecution's case against the main suspect. Ms. Nekesa told the court that she is a single mother of 2 and pleaded for a lenient sentence. That is a story you want to catch up with on page 13 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's take a look at page 14. The Korea-Africa Summit charts path to successful continent. South Korea aims to expand trade and investment with Africa through a series of agreements, says the leader. President Yeol made pledges to an audience of 25 African heads of state and government. Now, South Korean President Yoon Suk Yeol yesterday invoked Kenya's national motto, Harambee, in a bid to endear himself to African leaders gathered in Seoul for a major summit. Harambee is a Swahili word that loosely translates to pulling together, and South Korea leader was using it to indicate the need for cooperation. That is a top story making the headlines on page 14. So, South Korea aims to expand trade and investment with Africa through a series of agreements. You want to catch up with the roll call? Attending heads and states of government, we had William Ruto, the president of Kenya. We had Samia Suluhu, the president of Tanzania. There is Paul Kagame from Rwanda, Nana Akufo-Addo from Ghana, Mohamed Ould from Mauritania, Abiy Mohamed, Ethiopian Prime Minister, among many others in attendance. Now, with that story of Korea-Africa Summit, we shift focus and take a look at the expert opinion on the Daily Nation this morning. Now, advocacy can help world to tackle climate change. The term climate change has become part and parcel of our day-to-day conversation, particularly due to the frequent occurrence of unusual and extreme weather patterns. Recent events such as the devastating heavy rains and flooding in Kenya and the broader East African region highlight the immediate impacts of this global phenomenon. You want to catch up with that opinion on page 15 of the Standard this morning. Still on expert opinion, greening Africa can lead to zero emission trade. Now, on 23rd to 25th of March, the global freight and logistics industry experts gathered in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, for second annual Smart Freight Week hosted by Smart Freight Center ASFC. That was a huge step towards greening the Africa's trade, featuring critical stakeholders like Northern Corridor Transit and Transport Coordination Authority. You want to catch up with that on page 15 as well. Let's move on and take a look at page 16, reform UFA to make it effective. Now, these are sentiments by Jaindi Kisero, an economist, and I quote, Yatani's amendment amounted to repealing the entire law because the whole purpose of the interest and penalties was to impose punitive fines for non-compliance. Now, you want to catch up with that also as well on page 15, on page 16 rather. Let's take a look at the letter of the day, improve CBC and junior secondary in public schools. In 2017, the government unveiled the competency-based curriculum under a 2633 system to replace the 844, which has served Kenyans for the past 32 years. The challenge of infrastructure and modalities of its implementation in public schools is a thorn in the flesh, and that is beefed up for you in the letter of the day today on the Daily Nation on page 17. Let's shift gears and take a look at county news. We start with Bomet County. From criminals to IT experts inside the plan to reinvent Mulot, the county government has secured 52 acres to establish a software development factory. The state is keen to shed region's reputation as East Africa's cybercrime hub. Now, let's take a look at that story. The government has announced plans to establish an information and communication technology hub in Mulot as part of efforts to shed the region's reputation as East Africa's cybercrime headquarters. The devolved administration has secured land for the project to build Kenya's first rural-based hub of its kind. The multi-billion shilling initiative will be implemented by the Kenyan government in collaboration with the global ICT companies. That is a top story making the headlines in Bomet County, beefed up for you on page 18 of the Daily Nation this morning. Let's take a look briefly at Turkana County. Street families spark concern. Now, the rising number of street families in Lodwar has sparked concern. Dozens of homeless people have pitched camp under a footbridge on the Lodwar-Kakuma highway, posing a security threat to locals. The county government has now established a children rescue center with support from UNICEF and bought toys and equipment worth 23 million shillings. Education and Social Protection Chief Officer Etelej Korea said. Now, that is in Turkana County. Let's take a look at Nakuru County. Locals stranded as lake overflows. Residents of Kihoto Estate in Naivasha are in dire humanitarian crisis after rising waters from Lake Naivasha flooded their homes. Mr. Francis Avendi told the nation that his belongings are now under the care of a friend. Miss Esther Mudhoni, a mother of 3, is stranded in her house, unable to afford alternative accommodation. Now, let's take a look at Kwale County. Parents in plea for grade 7 bursaries. Now, parents have urged the county and national government to introduce bursaries and scholarships for grade 7 learners in order to keep them in school. They complained that acquiring new uniforms for learners joining junior school was a challenge. That's a top story making the headlines on page 18 as well. For the motor vehicle enthusiasts, you have the DN2 motoring article, and today it's all about building durable dirt roads affordably. The biggest improvement for the lowest expense can be achieved by ensuring the road has effective drainage. You want to catch up with that on the DN2 motoring article. Now, let's move on and take a look at the international news on the Daily Nation this morning. Far-right group Proud Boys regrouping to back Trump. Former president has not ruled out possibility of political violence if he loses in November. 4 years after a failed attempt to overturn the 2020 poll laws, extremists are gaining strength. That is in the US. Let's take a look at United Nations. Peacekeepers protect IDPs. Now, the UN peacekeepers are patrolling to protect some of the 150,000 displaced people fleeing, fighting in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, a UN spokesman said on Monday. The UN peacekeeping mission in the DRC, known as MONUSCO, reported heavy fighting and a series of clashes over the weekend between the M23 armed group and the Congolese armed forces south of Kanyaboyanga in North Kivu's Rutshuru territory, said Frahan. You want to catch up with that also on page 20. In Khartoum, medicine airlifted to North Darfur. A total of 20 tons of life-saving medicines have been airdropped in El Fasher, the capital city of North Darfur state, amid escalating clashes between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary rapid support forces, Sudan's health ministry announced Monday. Now, still in international news, Modi's alliance on course for majority but short of landslide. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's alliance was winning a majority of seats in early vote counting trends in the general election on Tuesday, but well short of the landslide predicted in exit polls, TV channels showed. You want to catch up with that also on page 20. Now, with that, let's take a look at business news. KQ extends freeze on staff complimentary tickets deal. Now, workers turn privilege offered by employers into cash cow. Latest move comes as airline investigates abuse of the initiative by some employees. Now, let's take a look at the numbers. 2 is the number of complimentary tickets that each employee is entitled to in a year. 4 is the number of people that the free tickets allows a KQ employee to be accompanied with, and 31 days in May that the investigations into abuse of scheme were to end. You want to catch up with that on page 22 of the Daily Nation this morning. Briefly, in matters aviation, Brussels Airlines now resumes its flights to Nairobi. The Belgian national carrier Brussels Airline has reintroduced passenger flights on the Brussels-Nairobi route in a move that will connect passengers from the European nation to Kenya's capital. The carrier, a subsidiary of Lufthansa Group, will fly on the route 6 times per week during summer and 4 times a week during winter. The airline, which stops flying the route in 2015, will deploy an Airbus A320 type of aircraft on the route. Let's take a look at matters insurance. Equity taps AAR boss to head new health cover unit. Equity Group has tapped AAR Insurance Holdings CEO Patrick Gitonga and appointed him the managing director of a new health insurance company as the financial services firm deepens its foray into the underwriting business. Sources said Mr. Gitonga, who has been the CEO at AAR since September 2022 has moved to Equity Group, where he has been appointed the managing director of Equity Health Insurance, the newly formed company. Well, with that, we take a look at some other news, and that lands us to sports news. Now, let's take a look at sports. We start with the rugby now. Shujaa, Kenyan heroes. Sports PS Toom sponsors SportPesa promise final reward for Victoria's team. Triumphant Kenya Sevens received home like conquering army, say this is just the beginning as Olympic Games loom. Now, let's take a look at tennis. Injured Djokovic pulls out of French Open. Defending champion Novak Djokovic pulled out of the French Open ahead of his quarterfinal due to a knee injury sustained in his marathon fourth round win over Francisco Cerundolo. Do you want to catch up with that on page 33? Let's take a look at a little bit of football. De Bruyne not ruling on Saudi move. Manchester City midfielder Kevin De Bruyne is keeping an open mind over a potential move to the Saudi Pro League. The 32-year-old Belgian said as he prepares to enter the final year of his contract with the Premier League champions. The Belgium captain has 6 Premier League crowns and 1 Champions League title, as well as 2 FA Cups and 5 League Cups to his name since his 2015 switch from German side VfL Wolfsburg. Now, with that, we move on and take a look at other stories on page 34. Dear CS Namwamba, as you celebrate the wins, truly fix Kenyan sports. Those are sentiments by Charles Nyende. For the first time since 1964, Kenya will not have a single boxer at the Olympic Games. Let's move on and take a look at other news on page 35. Burundi keeper Nahimana promises Kenya fireworks. This is all about the 2026 FIFA World Cup qualifiers. Now, the Swallows were scheduled to arrive in Lilongwe last evening, and the custodian still remembers painful 1-0 loss to Kenya in the 2017 CECAFA Senior Challenge Cup semis in Kisumu. You want to catch up with that on page 35. Also, trust more women with coaching, says Bullets coach Odemba. Kenyan women's football clubs have been urged to incorporate more women in their technical departments to boost the sports growth in country. Of the 12 Football Kenya Federation Women's Premier League FKF teams, only Kenya Police Bullets have a female head coach, Beldin Odemba, who also doubles up as Kenya's national women's team Harambee Starlets head coach. Now, let's take a look at the cover page of the Daily Nation this morning. Reject new tax proposals. Manufacturers urge MPs. National Assembly Finance Committee is chaired by Kuria Kimani, and players say prices of bread, oil, electric cars would be beyond reach of many. Those are what players say. Also, let's take a look at lobby. Says new levies will drive cost of banking up. Now, listen to this. Kenyans will be driven out of the formal financial service system if Parliament approve a proposal to impose VAT on transactions, a lobby has warned. The Kenya Bankers Association KBA told the National Assembly Finance and National Planning Committee that increasing excise duty on financial services from 15% to 20% would push Kenyans into informal banking. Now, with that story of the finance bill and matters tax, we come to today's session of Morning Momentum's tail end. But before we leave, we are celebrating the World Environment Day, and it's dubbed Our Land, Our Future. We are the generation of restoration. So happy World Environment Day. Remember to take care of the environment. Be a responsible citizen, an advocate of the environment. Let us come together in the spirit of Laudato Si and listen to the cry of the earth. Now, with that, see you tomorrow, same time, same place. This has been the Morning Momentum. Thank you so much for choosing to stay with the Younib TV, particularly the Morning Momentum. Many thanks to all those who made this broadcast a success. Raphael Wangila behind the lens, and the Chief Controller, Anifa Kavira. I have been your host, Alfonsoh.
Je, wewe ni mfanyabiashara katika sekta ya elimu, afya bora, usafiri ama unamiliki kampuni yoyote ile? Ungependa kupata fursa ya kutangaza biashara yako ili kuwafikia wateja zaidi? Usikonde. Runinga ya Younib inakupa fursa ya kupeperusha matangazo kuhusu bidhaa na huduma unazotoa kwa bei nafuu. Kwa maelezo zaidi, wasiliana nasi kupitia nambari za simu 0750344700 ama kupitia barua pepe marketing@younibtv.com. Jinyakulie leo. Younib TV, ever the best.